The Tree of Life is a symbolic diagram in Jewish mystical traditions, especially in Kabbalah, to describe divine structure, creation, and the spiritual path of ascent. It is usually referred to as the Kabbalistic Tree of Life to distinguish it from the Tree of Life that appears alongside the Tree of the Knowledge of Good and Evil in the Genesis creation narrative, as well as the archetypal Tree of Life found in many cultures. It serves as both a conceptual framework and, in later Kabbalistic texts, a schematic diagram linking the Sephiro, or divine emanations, to cosmology and human spiritual development. 𝗧𝗆𝗶𝗁𝗶𝗴𝗲 asserted that the concept of a tree of life, with different spheres encompassing aspects of reality, traces its origins back to the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the 9th century BCE. The Assyrians assigned moral values and specific numbers to Mesopotamian deities, similar to those used in Kabbalah, and claims that the state tied these to sacred tree images as a model of the king parallel to the idea of Adam Kadmon. The Tree of Life usually consists of 10 or 11 nodes symbolizing different archetypes and 22 paths connecting the nodes. The nodes are often arranged into 3 columns to represent that they belong to a common category. In Kabbalah, the nodes are called Sephiro. They are usually represented as circles, and the paths are usually represented as lines. The nodes usually represent encompassing aspects of existence, God, or the human psyche. The paths usually represent the relationship between the concepts ascribed to the spheres, or a symbolic description of the requirements to go from one sphere to another. The columns are usually symbolized as pillars. These usually represent different kinds of moral values, electric charges, or types of ceremonial magic. The Sephiro are the 10 spheres on the Tree of Life. Each sephira, singular of Sephiro, represents a different aspect of the divine, as well as aspects of human consciousness and existence. These are, from top to bottom, an 11th sephira, 𝗖𝗏𝗏, appears in some diagrams of the tree halfway between Keter, node 1, and Tiferet, node 6. 𝗖𝗏𝗏, translated to knowledge, is the location, the mystical state, where all 10 Sephiro in the Tree of Life are united as one, serves as the culmination of all other Sephirots. These Sephiro are often associated with the 4 celestial worlds of the Kabbalah, 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗆, the celestial world of emanation, Keter, Kether, Chokmah, Chokhmah, Binah, Bariah, Bria, Briah, Kosia, the celestial world of creation, 𝗖𝗆𝗄𝗆, the celestial world of formation, 𝗲𝗆𝗆, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzah, Hod, Yesod, Asaya, the celestial world of action, Malkuth. The diagram is also used in Christian Kabbalah, Hermetic Kabbalah, and Theosophy. The nodes are also associated with deities, angels, celestial bodies, moral values, single colors or combinations of them, and specific numbers. Sephiro, meaning emanations, are the 10 attributes, emanations in Kabbalah, through which Ein Sof, infinite space, reveals itself and continuously creates both the physical realm and the 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗏𝗃, the chained descent of the metaphysical 4 worlds. The term is alternatively transliterated into English as Sephirot, Sephiroth, singular Sephira, Sephira. As revelations of the Creator's will, the Sephiro should not be understood as 10 gods, but rather as 10 different channels through which the one God reveals his will. In later Jewish literature, the 10 Sephiro refer either to the 10 manifestations of God, the 10 powers or faculties of the soul, or the 10 structural forces of nature. Alternative configurations of the Sephiro interpreted by various schools in the historical evolution of Kabbalah, with each articulating differing spiritual aspects. The tradition of enumerating 10 is stated in the Sefer Yetzirah, 10 Sephiro of nothingness, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, as altogether 11 Sephiro listed across the various schemes, 2, Keter and 𝗖𝗏𝗏, are seen as unconscious and conscious manifestations of the same principle, conserving the 10 categories. The Sephiro are described as channels of divine creative life force, or consciousness, through which the unknowable divine essence is revealed to mankind. In Cordovan Kabbalah, the forces of creation are considered autonomous forces that evolve independently. By contrast, in Lurian or Lurianic Kabbalah, the Kabbalah of Isaac Luria, the Sephiro are perceived as a constellation of forces in active dialogue with one another at every stage of that evolution. Luria described the Sephiro as complex and dynamically interacting entities known as 𝗏𝗏𝗱𝗏𝗏, faces, each with its own symbolically human-like persona. The first Sephira, Keter, describes the divine superconscious will that is beyond conscious intellect. The next three Sephiro, Chokmah, Bina, and Dayat, describe three levels of conscious divine intellect. In particular, Dayat represents Keter in its knowable form, the concept of knowledge. Will and knowledge are corresponding, somewhat dependent opposites. The seven subsequent Sephiro, Chest, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth, describe the primary and secondary conscious divine emotions. The Sephiro of the left side and the Sephira of Malkuth are feminine, as the female principle in Kabbalah describes a vessel that receives the outward male light, then inwardly nurtures and gives birth to the Sephiro below them. Kabbalah sees the human soul as mirroring the divine. After Genesis 1:27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and more widely, all creations as reflections of their life source, in the Sephiro. Therefore, the Sephiro also describe the spiritual life of man, break down man's psychological processes, and constitute the conceptual paradigm in Kabbalah for understanding everything. This relationship between the soul of man and the divine gives Kabbalah one of its central metaphors in describing divinity. Alongside the other, or light metaphor, however, Kabbalah repeatedly stresses the need to avoid all corporeal interpretation. Through this, the Sephiro are related to the structure of the body, and are reformed into 𝗏𝗏𝗱𝗏𝗏, personas. Underlying the structural purpose of each Sephira is a hidden motivational force, which is understood best by comparison with a corresponding psychological state in human spiritual experience. Kabbalah uses subtle anthropomorphic analogies and metaphors to describe God in Judaism, both the God-world relationship and the inner nature of the divine. These include the metaphor of the soul-body relationship, the functions of human soul powers, the configuration of human bodily form, and female-male influences in the divine. As all levels of creation are constructed around the 10 Sephiro, their names in Kabbalah describe the particular role each plays in forming reality. These are the external dimensions of the Sephiro, describing their functional roles in channeling the divine, creative or light, to all levels. As the Sephiro are viewed to comprise both metaphorical lights and vessels, their structural role describes the particular identity each Sephira possesses from its characteristic vessel. Underlying this functional structure of the Sephiro, each one possesses a hidden, inner spiritual motivation that inspires its activity. This forms the particular characteristic of inner light within each Sephira. Understanding the Sephiro throughout Jewish mysticism is achieved by their correspondence to the human soul. This applies to the outer, Kabbalistic structure of the Sephiro. It applies even more to their inner dimensions, which correspond to inner psychological qualities in human perception.